Okay, let's get started. Hi. Hi. My name's Madeline. A lot of you already know me. Thank you for coming. This is like research that spanned over almost a year now, so I'm super excited to share this with you guys because it's something that I'm really passionate about that I think like we can do a lot more with, and there's kind of a lot to dive into here, so I'm excited to get started. We have some people on Zoom and then we have people in person that you guys can't see. So bear with me because I'm really not tech savvy for someone in esports. So technology scares me. But yeah. Okay. So my name's Madeline. I am the player support coordinator at UH Esports. I'm also the initiative coordinator for our Women of UHE, which is our marginalized gender program. UH Esports, some of you are very familiar with, some of you probably don't know anything at all. It's our esports program here at UH. We are competitive. We host competitive teams. They play in tournaments. Right now we have about 110 varsity members. And so it's a lot of people. We also have content and broadcast teams. It's not just competitive players. And we also have a lot of people like me, who's in management, who's focused more on coordination, who kind of deals with more of the back end of things. You don't normally see, or I hope you don't see me if I'm doing my job right. Currently, my position is player support coordinator. We have 9 varsity teams and 5 JV teams. These are teams that are competing in specific tournaments against other collegiate programs. We also have over 100, I already said that, people in our community, and we have a really big Discord community. Hello, feel free to come in. So our goals for our program is basically to improve the environment for our esports space. It's to create more of a positive and kind of learning environment for esports. We want people to play and we want to be able to host competitive collegiate play. And then we also want to promote career paths. And that's kind of my main goal for this year, is to make sure that we're getting students after graduation to go on to esports, to work into gaming, and to make that into a bigger possibility. So a lot of the stuff that we've been doing this year is having a lot of amazing internships. It's why I'm promoting my research right now, to make sure other people can do research if they're interested, and kind of go for the different factors that can happen after college, because there usually is kind of a drop in gaming after college and people kind of give up or think that they can't stay in it. These are some of my teams. So I want to explain a little bit more about my position. I'm a player support coordinator. I support the players. I do coordination. It's pretty self-explanatory. These are some of my teams. This is our league. And then these are a few of our Smash players and one of our Valorant teams. These are the physical people that I look after. I make sure that they're okay. They all have their own team leads that do a really good job of looking after them as well. And it's kind of just me looking after the team leads, looking after the teams, running communication, making sure everything's running smoothly, that we're working together well. Another one of my titles is this WoUHE initiative coordinator. WoUHE is Women of UHE. We support marginalized genders. This is something that's really important to me this year and is why I'm bringing it up. Because it's something that I put a lot more attention to, as I think it's more important to get marginalized genders into gaming. I'm a marginalized gender myself. I want to support the people around me that kind of fall under that category and make sure that they're in the most supportive environment for that. And that space is definitely needed right now in esports. We have multiple board members, some of them are here, for the program that help out and just kind of make sure everything's running smoothly. I'm super thankful for them. And there's just only benefits for having a marginalized program in esports and in any kind of organization. We also, I'm happy to announce, have our own competitive teams. We just created 2 Valorant teams to support kind of marginalized genders in the competitive arena, because usually they don't get a chance to compete on our usual like varsity and JV teams for UHE. Yay. So I have to do like some self-promo. We have a podcast and we also have our own Discord. Right now, the Discord's kind of just for marginalized genders. But if you're interested in checking it out, feel free to do so. It's for alumni, for people not even connected to UH, for people that have just joined UH. We also have an Instagram if you want to check that out. I have to do it. It's my job. Okay. So my research, which is like the main part of this presentation, is esports in Japan. And I traveled to Tokyo over the summer. I spent about 3 weeks there just researching esports in Japan, gaming in Japan, and kind of what that means. So when we look at these gaming or organizations, does any of them ring a bell? Crazy. Can anyone tell me a game that one of them made?
Spider-Man.
Mario.
Yeah.
Silent Hill.
Yes. No one else mentioned Silent Hill in the other class. It's one of my favorites. Okay, personally, the biggest one is Nintendo. I think no one ever wants to say it because it's like the most obvious answer. Also, Sony Interactive Entertainment, obviously Sony, is probably one of the biggest organizations. They're all in Japan. These are massive companies that are originated and kind of still working in Japan, and they've made probably the biggest names in kind of gaming in creating the games that we know and creating the history that we know. So I think it's important to mention these guys because this is gaming. This isn't just gaming in Japan. This is gaming as like a whole. So what is gaming in Tokyo? We know gaming has all of these big organization names. We've seen Nintendo, we've seen Sony, we've seen all of these other kind of small indie ones. We know that there's a big name for gaming in Tokyo. But when I went to Tokyo, it's slightly different because obviously most of this is online. So we're not physically seeing gaming as much as we are online. Walking around, we have these pretty popular game centers. They're usually like 3 stories. They have just a ton of arcade games, a bunch of claw machines. It's insane. They're like always super visually overwhelming for me, super like loud. And it makes sense that they're there because they are like more of a casual style of gaming. Arcade gaming is everywhere. And it's the thing that a lot of my research kind of fell onto observational data. What am I physically seeing here? And this is what I physically saw. There's a ton of these arcade games. There isn't that many esports arenas. There's not that many gaming cafes. Most of the gaming is kind of online centered, and we could probably say the same for Hawaii or the same for other places in the States. The main competitive gaming in Japan is mobile gaming. Console and PC is way less. Console is a lot more than PC. Mobile gaming absolutely dominates, and I'll talk about that more. But some of the places that I visited are like Akihabara, Ikebukuro, Shibuya, and Harajuku, which are probably the most well-known names in Tokyo. Like even someone that's never been to Japan probably recognizes at least one of these as the big places in Japan. This is where a lot of culture comes from, a lot of well-known culture, a lot of kind of crazy different environments and spaces, and a lot of nightlife. And this is also where a lot of the gaming is. But I was kind of surprised to see that there wasn't as many gaming cafes as I thought there was. A group of our program went onto an internship in Korea, and they were talking about how they went to this gaming cafe and they were able to play there, and kind of like there are these different environments that they could go to. But when I went to Japan, these didn't really exist. Or they did exist, but they were kind of in like a grungy part of town, or they just weren't as visibly appealing. They weren't as popular. There are a ton of cafes in Japan, and I can say that pretty confidently. But when it came to competitive gaming, to PC gaming, to consoles, it just didn't really exist. And that's what I physically saw. Okay, I don't know if the noise is gonna play for this, but one of the things that I did in Japan is went to the Valorant Masters competition. This is one of the biggest tournaments in Valorant, which is a FPS game, and it's become very popular over the past few years. This was in Chiba, so it's right outside of Tokyo, and it was insane because I have never actually been to an esports arena. I haven't seen a physical competition, and stepping into that kind of environment and seeing what my job really is was crazy to me. It was like completely eye-opening because I'm remote. I don't see people. It's really weird for me to talk to people in person because everything is always online, and going into a space of people that have the same passions, that are here for the same reason, that are doing jobs that are similar to mine, was so crazy to me because I'm not used to that. I'm used to everything being online. So this was the end. This was the semifinals, or like right before the finals. And this was the very last round before who won? The team that won. I don't remember. Hopefully this isn't super loud. The reason I put this in here is because I know some of you are probably looking at the screen and are going, what is happening on there? But this is the best way I can describe esports. There is massive screens and there's people coming in person to watch the game. And that was crazy to me. And you can see on the left side, all these people running to the stage, and just the noise was insane. Like I definitely had a headache after that, but it was just so much fun. And it was really eye-opening for me because I saw, oh, this is the esports scene in Japan, or this is like part of it. Even though Riot Games, if you don't know, is an American company, and that's the organization that created the game Valorant, which is being played on the screen. Please don't play again. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about it. I think this is important to bring up because even though Riot Games is an American company and they're just hosting it in Japan, it was mainly Japanese viewership that was there. And that was something observational that really surprised me because what I'll touch on a bit later is that there isn't a lot of competitive competitive gaming in Japan. And so seeing mostly a Japanese audience come to watch a tournament was pretty surprising to me because I'm like, where are these people normally? But the reason that I know for sure it was mostly Japanese audience is because I was there and I saw them, but also because they locked tickets. So you could only buy a ticket if you were in Japan or had a Japanese credit card. So it completely cut off a bunch of foreign transactions because you literally couldn't, unless you knew someone, unless you had some secret ties. But most people in this audience were Japanese and they were passionate about it and they were super into it. And it was really awesome to see because it was not something I was kind of seeing outside of this, even though it's an American game and it's something that Japan hasn't really dominated. Their team wasn't even in here. I think they got cut out probably about 2 weeks in or something around there. Online, there was about 830,000 peak viewers. That's a lot of people. There was 10,000 people in person, and there were still people that flew out to see this tournament. And that's something I want to note because it didn't just make Japan is pretty attractive for a tournament, for an esports space. And this kind of proved it in that step. So when we talk about global esports, China absolutely dominates. They have a lot of mobile gaming that is just makes a lot of money. And they have a lot of teams that have just kind of dominated. We see US is second, South Korea is next, and then you say, oh, where's Japan? Japan's down here. They have 5, 6 countries before them, And when we go back to, there's all these popular gaming organizations in Japan, like Sony, like Nintendo. So why is Japan all the way down here? If there are these big corporations, if there is a lot of money in Japan that are making it into gaming, that proves that gaming is somewhat successful, it's viable. When we talk about esports teams, most of these, I mean, Dallas and San Francisco is pretty obviously American, but there aren't any Japanese teams up here. And that kind of, you're going like, why? There's so much gaming in Japan, so why isn't there any competitive gaming? So what is the competitive gaming? It's mostly mobile games. And to me, that makes sense, because when I'm in Tokyo, you're sitting on the trains, you're watching people take their hour commutes, and there's a lot of commuting in Japan, and I think some of you probably know that. They're on their phones, and like almost everyone's on their phone. I think it's awkward, like you have to look at your phone because you don't want to make eye contact with random people. So sometimes I have my phone and I'll just look at it with nothing on it. Like I had no Wi-Fi, no cell, and I'm just like, okay, this makes me feel better. But most people on their phones are playing games, and it makes sense. It's a de-stressor. It's a way to pass the time. They're commuting these long hours, so what else are they gonna do? It's the biggest revenue in Japan. Obviously, most popular, made approximately $20 billion in 2022. And then this is an example picture I took, a really bad picture I took. But there's all these advertisements for mobile gaming like everywhere on the trains. And you didn't really see them until you like started paying attention. And then I was like, oh, like that makes sense, I guess. When we get to PC gaming, we talked a little about Valorant. And so there is a team in Japan called Zeta Division, that is a Valorant team of Japanese players. And the reason that I think that Valorant might have become more attractive in Japan is because this team about a few years ago made it pretty far. And then suddenly we brings into this question of national identity. People are saying, oh, there's a Japanese team that I can relate to because that's where I'm from. And so, and they're doing well. So now I want to support them because they're doing well and I can relate to them. And it's the same thing that we come across in marginalized genders. Having a program for marginalized genders makes it way easier for others to come in and to play or to be a part of our program because they're comfortable seeing someone that they can relate to, that they have something in common with. And so the same thing happened in Japan. And I think that might have increased kind of an awareness of Valorant or more of an interest in the game. So even though they're not doing that well right now, I think they haven't made it that far since a few years ago, but they're still popular because they did do it once. And so that makes me think if they did it again, would more esports kind of appear? Would there be more Valorant teams? Would there be more competition? And there is a little bit. And there also is a lot of game changer teams in Japan, which are marginalized gender teams for Valorant. There's a decent amount in Japan, which is also awesome to see. So my ideal is that these are going to keep growing. Because I don't want it to be all negative. I don't want to say like, oh, there's no gaming, there's no esports, this is all like useless. But there is. It's just in these kind of like small avenues, and it's definitely at the beginning. There's a lack of professional gaming for kind of quite a few reasons. There's government restrictions that basically, I'm not going to read the act name because it's just super long, but it restricts gambling. They have really severe gambling laws that kind of dictate what you can and can't do, and that kind of comes into prize money. And prize money is like the main way tournaments are making money or people are getting money from tournaments. So they need that to make it profitable, to make it work. And it's just not there. There's also a lack of PC gaming. Generally, consoles are way more popular in Japan, and it kind of stayed that way for a while. And there's just less competitive players because of that. There's also a lot of kind of social aspects in Japan that come into play that I personally didn't touch on that much, but I think is still important to acknowledge. This kind of busy work culture, this idea that you have to be working constantly, that maybe gaming is kind of too lazy, or most give it up during high school. So there's not a lot of people that say, oh, maybe I can do this. And it's very similar in the US. I think we're just a few steps ahead. There's also a lack of like public support and general just like accessibility to gaming, to PCs, to consoles. There's a few esports organizations in Japan that are supporting more esports. NASEF Japan is an American organization that has a Japan branch, and it's funded by, what is it? It's like a Japanese company called Third Wave supports NASEF Japan. So this is actually, the guy on the left of me is their chief director. And the guy on the right deals with scholastic kind of events and operations. And then this is Kevin. Kevin works in in LA, where their actual like main headquarters are, as a chief advisor, I believe, or chief head of education. A lot of fancy titles. But coincidentally, he was just here at the exact same time I was. So I ended up being able to get into a meeting with them, which was fantastic. There's also a few other organizations like JESU and CESA. Part of my research kind of touched on gaming in education, which is a thing. It's kind of like, it exists the same amount here in Hawaii as it does in Japan. It's just kind of barely there. I was fortunate to be able to visit a high school where they were, it was so weird, because you think of a Japanese high school and it's quite traditional, or usually it's quite an old building. And at the very top of this Japanese high school is this room that is completely decked out in like equipment and lights and the desks, and they had pretty good specs for their computers. They had good keyboards, they had everything. They had LEDs on the ceiling, and it was super trippy because I was just like, this is not what I was going to expect. But it was awesome. They have an esports class. They teach coding through Minecraft, and a lot of the kids are super passionate. They are working together in teams. They're kind of focusing on coding and how they can put stuff together, and the teacher is explaining things. They kind of do little projects. It was really awesome to be able to just see them do that in the process of it all. And when I was there, I was able to talk to someone that taught English at that school, and he ran a class called like teaching English through esports, which is also something I did not expect to find. And he was telling me how that the kids were just so uninterested before he started doing this, that they didn't really want to speak, that they weren't that interested in learning English, or it just wasn't that like beneficial for them. So the moment they kind of connected it to something more relevant to their daily life, like Twitch streamers, or even just kind of like general video games, they became way more passionate. And he said he noticed this sudden interest in speaking more, in joining in conversations, in kind of communication, which is really important in Japan, especially as they're kind of more interacting more with foreigners. Obviously, the doors are opening more because of COVID being like way better. But this international interaction is really important in esports. So being able to have kids in Japan learning English is always going to be important. And if they're interested in gaming, if they're interested in esports, like that's better. But having that kind of communication going, and even if they don't do anything in esports, but they're passionate about learning English, I think that's something really important, that's tangible, that anyone can kind of grab onto and say, yeah, that's important. I did touch on upper education. There's mostly just research. There's kind of a lot of research, which I found pretty interesting, about like esports and the elderly, and getting involved with motor functions, improving elderly's like life kind of quality, and improving their general motor skills. At other universities, there is maybe esports clubs, but there isn't any kind of program run, like faculty-led programs like we have here at UH. And this isn't just specific to UH, they're all over the US. There's hundreds of them. Whereas in Japan, it's mainly student-led clubs that are kind of competitive, but are in this gray zone. There's not that many, and they're quite personal for the university. You're not really going to get involved with it unless you're at that university, unless you're involved with that school. Whereas I think our program and a lot of other programs in the US are pretty global. We partnered with the Overwatch League like 2 years in a row, and we hosted their competitions. And a lot of other schools have done similar things where they've partnered with Riot Games, and they've had all of these kind of connections like that. That just doesn't really exist in college yet for Japan. I also was able to visit Temple University, Japan. And you may say, Madeline, that's an American school. Why are you bringing up an American school about Japanese universities? It's because they run under the same rules that Japanese universities do too. Even though it's an American university, it has to follow under the same regulations. And that means when joining esports tournaments, they have to do the same things. So because they're under the same rules, I count it. They're the only school right now that has their own like faculty run program, and hopefully we'll also be partnering with them in the future. They're also directly in Shibuya, which a lot of you probably know, at least by the famous crossing and the crazy nightlife and all of that stuff. It's like the best place for a university to be, to have an esports program, because it's absolutely insane out there. And it's also getting bigger. I think because they're an American school, they can kind of take more advantage of that to facilitate, because most of their teachers are foreigners. So there's an acceptance of esports, of gaming in the school, even though in Japan, it might not have the same kind of like acceptance and interest. So I like to bring that up because it is the only program that's faculty led. So how are these students meant to get into gaming? It's kind of doesn't really exist right now. I was able to visit a place called LFS, which was in Ikebukuro, and basically it used to be a public arena that anyone could go to, like anyone could use their PCs, anyone could use their equipment. Then COVID happened, and afterwards they just aren't public anymore. So they're hosting a lot of private companies that are working in these spaces. This was their broadcast room. So they have, I don't know how much people know about broadcasting, but there's a lot of different roles to basically live streaming esports games. And then they also have this massive room where they have a stage where they have people working. And most of these people got into esports through kind of tech-based careers. And this was the same. Luckily, I was able to interview a lot of people in Japan that kind of either worked for Riot Games Japan or worked in kind of more of the schools or different areas. And all of them had these backgrounds in tech. And that was a similarity that I noticed. They all kind of had either they worked at Microsoft or they worked at Sony, and then they kind of like fell into gaming, into esports in the kind of later parts of their career. There are a few people that kind of have started gaming careers, I would say earlier or younger, but I wouldn't compare it to America. It's just not the same. And there isn't really a lot of career opportunities in Japan yet to work in esports. If you tried to go out there, it's already hard here to do it. So if you went there, it's practically impossible unless you have the experience like working at a big company like Microsoft to get in there. But there's still a lot of opportunities in Japan and also in the US as a whole. I think esports is in a really rough space right now. I don't know if a lot of you guys know what's going on, but there is a lot of layoffs happening, and it's kind of in a rocky area where companies are suddenly deciding this isn't working and we need to restructure absolutely everything, which sucks because a lot of people are getting laid off. But hopefully in the long term, it's a benefit. So I don't want this to be super negative. Yeah, esports in Japan and gaming in Japan is kind of this like weird area, and this esports especially just doesn't really exist, but it doesn't mean it's like never going to exist. And I think it actually has a benefit. And that's my main point in this research, is that yes, they're kind of a few steps behind, but look at esports in America right now and look at greater Europe. There's not that many like better things happening right now. And I think Japan has a history of doing this, where they see what happens first and then they react, and then they kind of like figure out the best way to do something. And sometimes that's the smartest way, because if you're seeing someone else failing, you can say, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. So I can do something different. I can figure out a different way to do this because I just saw my friend fail at whatever. And it does kind of suck, because obviously we don't want failure, but failure is always going to happen, and it just promotes growth. So I think Japan is in the best spot right now to kind of start from the beginning and have that growth without this massive setback, without this kind of failure that's holding people back, that's laying people off. And they can kind of create a better ecosystem for esports, and I genuinely think they will. Talking to people in Japan was super inspirational. Like, everyone was very kind of passionate, they were interested, they wanted things to grow. They were very open and honest about what the career looked like, what the environment looked like, and how it actually was. And I think those kind of people are so important for this growth and for things to change, for things to get better. So in the end, I think this is an important topic to bring up, because this isn't the end. This research is kind of just dipping your toes in. There's so much more. There's barely any research on esports, especially in Japan. And I think it's super important to kind of bring more of an awareness to that, to say, hey, we need more research. We need more people interested in this. We want to learn more about this, because there are opportunities there to kind of learn more, to figure out more kind of ways of improving things, to see how we can learn, because there are things that I saw in Japan that I took back here and said, I want to do that with our program. And that's from a place that doesn't have a collegiate program like we do. And I still learn things and I still figure things out. And I think it's really important to acknowledge what is everyone else doing, especially because we're in Hawaii, we're very close to Asia. And it's good to kind of see, what are these other countries doing? Why does South Korea have such a massive esports space? Why do they make so much money? Why does China make so much money? Why isn't Japan making as much money? Those questions, especially in esports, is really important to figuring out how we can improve and how we can take that internally and improve our own programs, how you can kind of build your knowledge and apply it to other fields. It doesn't just have to be esports. There's also a lot of educational benefits to esports. We deal a lot with this stigma of gaming is a waste of time. It's not worth it. Your mom's yelling at you to get off. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people need to take a break, but there are benefits to esports. There are a lot of science papers and discussions behind motor skills that you're developing through gaming, that there is something tangible there that makes it more worthwhile than just being like, I'm wasting my time all day, because most of the time it isn't true. And there are a lot of positive aspects to esports, and hopefully over time, we can change that stigma and make a more kind of positive environment for esports, for gaming, because it doesn't always have to be negative. And there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done, but I think it's possible. And taking these steps and acknowledging what we already have is really important to kind of building those future goals and to getting to a place that's more positive. So my key takeaways, competitive gaming is growing in Japan. It's not just at like standstill, it's not going down, it's growing. Gaming and education is also growing. There is more organizations wanting to use gaming and education to increase people's English, to increase their motor skills, to help with teamwork, coordination, all of those kind of topics. There's this importance of global connection. Esports is not solely one country. It's all of us. It's a bunch of different countries. It's a bunch of different cultures, and we're all very tied together because it's not a super big topic. it's not something that absolutely everyone in the world does, especially esports, not even just gaming. So we are globally connected. And it's important if you are learning languages such as Japanese or Korean to kind of keep doing it, to take advantage of that, especially when we're in Hawaii, because we're so globally connected in tech that it's so important to be able to communicate with these people. If I didn't have any Japanese speaking, I would probably have not had a fun time. But because I did, I was able to take this research further than I would have if I wasn't able to speak at all. I'm not saying I'm good at speaking Japanese, because I'm definitely not, but it helps. And it kind of proved it like, oh, I can use this not just to practice in class, I can actually speak for something important and meaningful to me and to connect with people on a personal level. So that's my pro for the learning languages. Supporting marginalized genders is something I'm always going to kind of keep repeating. I think it's important to do that from the very beginning, because the space that esports is in right now is kind of awful. Like, so many things have happened that's negative towards marginalized genders. I don't want to have to create a program to support marginalized genders. I want it to not need it, because why do we need it in the first place? Why is there a problem there? And it shouldn't be there. And so if we can go back and look at esports from the very beginning and say, what do we need to change to make this not happen as it is now? I want that to happen. And if countries are kind of further behind in their journeys, in their building of these esports organizations, maybe we can go in there and like cut it off from the source, make sure it is happening as it should be. And yeah, careers in gaming exist. I'm not going to say in Japan there's a lot, but it is something that's growing, and there are organizations that are wanting to take you in, and there's more things that you can do to kind of get involved. It is possible to work in gaming. So I do want to take the time to acknowledge all of these people. I talked to a lot of interesting folks, and there's a lot of organizations specifically that helped me out. My entire research was paid for by the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. I applied with all of my stuff. They gave me the money. I was able to go to Japan, and I think that's super cool. So I'm definitely a advocate for UROP. And if you have any questions about that, if you're interested in doing research, if you're faculty and you want to help with a student that might be interested in research, I really highly recommend it. It was such an easy process. And honestly, I didn't have to do that much in return. All of this is extra. And it was just so much learning and such a good opportunity. So I definitely highly recommend that. And everyone else that helped out. Sky, our director of the program, who was my mentor for this research, was amazing, and he's also my boss, so I have to say that. And yeah, so this is, if you're interested in getting more involved, I have the Women of UHE Discord at the top and UHE at the bottom. You all have my email because I harass you all with emails, but feel free to let me know if there's anything you want to discuss further. And otherwise, I'll open the floor to any questions you guys might have. And if anyone on Zoom can drop them in the chat, and hopefully I can see it. Yay. Thank you. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to bother me. It's okay if you don't. Go for it.
Hi, first time chatter. Didn't even go to this university. Ironically, I'm actually from a Japanese university.
Also,
But, I heard there's a pretty good possibility of a round 2, and for that round 2, I'm sort of wondering where you're going to be focusing in your research on.
sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I heard there's a good possibility of a round 2 of this research.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'm sort of wondering what's the next step, and what you're going to focus in on.
So I kind of want to focus more on women in gaming. That's where a lot of my passions are right now, but I want to dive more into collegiate spaces and into education and gaming, because I think I did a very kind of overview of the research, and there's like a lot more that could be done there. So that's definitely a possibility for next year. I may be looking for a team to do that with, and it not just be a solo project for me. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, it's only something I've been thinking, like I just finished my research and I'm just writing my paper now for this research. So I'm kind of like still in that preliminary thought process, but it is something I'm considering for next summer. I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to see what possibly for this.
Thank you.
If I can need any help in any way.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming. What's up?
So where did the idea for going to Tokyo or focusing your research on Japan come from?
I am a Japanese major. So I have this like passion and love for kind of all Japanese topics and the language and the culture. And I knew I wanted to do some kind of research, and I actually didn't know what I was going to do at first. I was thinking of doing something related to dance as my other major. I'm a double major in dance and Japanese. And then I just couldn't find anything I was passionate about until I suddenly looked at my job and I was like, oh, that makes sense. And I have connections in Japan and I know people in esports that would help me out. So it kind of fit together like that. But yeah, it was pretty random. What's up, Jasmine?
Sorry. Was there any idea to reach out to broadcast personalities in Japan? Or do you think even that sector of sports wasn't really built up enough for you to like have anybody like in mind to reach out for that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's something I thought about. Honestly, for research, reaching out to people is like the worst part. The amount of people I reached out to versus the amount that actually responded is like probably like 10%, which is still pretty good, but it just because there isn't as many kind of broadcast organizations or groups that are kind of existing, it's harder to find people willing to participate in research or that aren't super busy, because everyone I saw was like insanely busy. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for coming. I appreciate it all. Ah, it's Alohi. I'm sorry, Alohi. No, I answer. No, it's okay. I'm sorry, everyone can see your response. Yeah, so Alohi's asking what kind of steps that I believe programs and clubs in Japan can do to support more development in the esports scene. I think what they're doing right now is really good. Doing things like putting esports in high schools is a really good step to kind of like creating a positive environment for those high schoolers that go on to college. I think for universities, there kind of needs to be more program like faculty-led support to create esports into a bigger program funded thing, which I could not tell you if it's going to happen or not. But especially in high schools and middle schools and lower education. And I think funding more kind of environments for people to be able to play games, for more tournaments is really important, to kind of having places for those kind of communities, those people that are interested in those games to be able to be a part of, to be in, is really important. So it's those like steps that kind of have to be taken, and it's something that again I would want to research further. There's a lot of kind of unanswered questions that I don't know if I could actually answer truthfully right now, or that I know, but I want to know them and I want to kind of figure it out. I hope that answered. Thanks for joining, Alohi. Okay, you're free.
That's all right. I just wanted to say, thank you everybody for coming, and I wanted to reiterate, the proposition of doing this type of research, with UROP. And so I really encourage folks that are interested in looking at topics of esports. UROP provides roughly $500,000 of undergraduate per year, which is amazing. And so going through the process with Madeline was something that we, were able to learn about the process and to see how it goes and how long it takes. Really the most complicated part of it is going through the IRB. After that, it's kind of smooth sailing. But, you know, like I said, I've encouraged all my students to really take this seriously because this is a topic in which Madeline is trailblazing very new, very exciting research that has not been done before. High school esports research in Japan is an untouched topic. And she has a lot of room to grow in this. And it could set her up for a very interesting career if she decides to pursue graduate school. But for other folks as well, I really encourage you to take it seriously if you are interested in this topic because there's a lot of room to grow. And so, you know, looking at a possible next topic, I think one of the key things that I found very fascinating about Madeline's research is this idea of underdevelopment of esports in Japan. So in my course that I teach for the School of Communications, a course called Esports in Society. Often a lot of the models that we look at with esports are from developed locations and geographies and nations, just like South Korea. There's a lot of push, a lot of expectations that you need to be very dominant in esports, whether that is a player, a company, or a nation, right? So a lot of things in esports looks towards tremendous growth. But if you look at Japan, it's sort of the flip opposite, right? They're very, I wouldn't say very comfortable, but they're not nervous about FOMO, right? They don't really care that they're missing out on things. They're taking their time, and that itself could be a new model around esports. A wait and see and observe before you act. Right? So I think that is a very powerful takeaway from Madeline's research. And so I hope that, you know, like I said, to think about that as this topic.
Thank you, Sky. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. This is something I'm really passionate about, so I'm grateful that you listened to me kind of like ramble about it for a little bit. But I hope you have a great rest of your days. Thank you.